Hello, everyone. Welcome to the March 2026 CLF Boston Northeast Reuse Group meeting. Today, we have a very exciting presentation from Jason Roberts of Marble Fairbanks. In our own backyard in the Boston area, there is a deconstruction project. We'd love to talk about it. So we'll do the typical presentation for about half an hour. Please save any Q&A you may have till the end. Feel free to put in the chat, or when we do it, raise your hands. And then afterwards, we will talk about the survey we sent out last month about the reuse roadmap version 2, as well as some other updates. Before we get into it, Olivia, anything to add?
No, let's just get into it.
There we go. Very exciting. So we'll introduce now Jason Roberts of Marble Fairbanks. You should be able to share your screen. I hope I enabled that properly. If not, I can. But please lead us into this project right in Charlestown.
Unmute. All right. Well, thank you for having me. I'm always really thrilled to talk about the work that we're doing around the country. I'll introduce myself. I'm Jason Roberts. I'm a director at Marble Fairbanks Architects. Marble Fairbanks is a small architectural design firm located in New York City. Our offices are in the Flatiron District. We have been around for over 30 years. Marble Fairbanks was founded by Scott Marble and Karen Fairbanks. Karen Fairbanks is the chair of the architecture program at Barnard College. She's been there for about 35 years now. Scott was formerly the chair of the architecture program at Georgia Tech, and prior to that was a professor at Columbia University, GSAP, for quite a while. Most of the work that Marble Fairbanks does is in the public sector. We do a lot of higher ed projects. We do a lot of civic projects. We do a lot of libraries. We're quite known for our library work. A lot of it all hinges on academia and finding out what the next big thing is. And that's probably what got us interested in these last few years in circular design and the end of buildings life cycle and how it can be reborn again. So we have a really interest in that, and I'll give you a little bit of a background on some of the projects that we've worked on. As I mentioned, most of our work falls in the realm of public projects. We do a lot of cultural and educational projects. We've worked with all three branches of the New York Public Library System, projects ranging from museums to classroom space to performance space to, again, libraries. Obviously, working in New York City, we do a lot of adaptive reuse and have a pretty knowledgeable experience with historic structures. A couple of examples here. One actually at Brown University, where we renovated the Churchill House and the Rights and Reasons Theater. Closer to our home, up in Harlem, the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, which is a research library of the New York Public Library System. And then also more recently, renovating the ground floor of the Center for Brooklyn History, which is now part of the Brooklyn Public Library. And then we also, and this kind of gets into how we got involved in the Charlestown Navy Yard in the first place, is that we do a lot of strategic planning, feasibility studies, master plans, and these are on a range of scales. We did one project for Parsons where we planned their kind of master planning building strategy over the course of the following 10 and 15 years. We did a study for the National Park Service that looked at all of their museum collection around the Northeast corridor, which amounted to about 35 million items, and suggested better ways for them to consolidate and keep their archives. So a range of scales, but the one that kind of brought us to Charlestown and the Charlestown Navy Yard was through National Park Service and through an IDIQ contract, an indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contract that we were a part of with the General Services Administration. Um, what they were looking for at the time, and this was in 2017, is when we started work at the Charlestown Navy Yard, is that they were looking for a workplace recommendation report. They had about 19 different buildings that were under their management, and they were looking to consolidate their workforce of about 200, 215 full-time staff plus seasonal staff under one roof. And so we took about a year and a half to look into what made the most sense for them and what buildings made the most sense for them to consolidate to. And at the same time that that was going on, Sasaki was working on a report for them as well, but that was focused on the visitor experience. And so they were developing, a guide for them to improve the visitor experience in the Navy Yard, really create a front door and a more welcoming experience for those that visited the Navy Yard and the site. So these were all the buildings that we took a look at in that workplace recommendation report. I'll note the Hoosac stores down here in the lower left-hand corner, which we'll discuss as part of this deconstruction project. But then also up here, Building 107, which will become part of our narrative here as well. But the both the workplace recommendation report and the visitor experience plan were kind of jump started from this idea that the park superintendent at the time, Michael Creasy, had that some of these buildings are in such a state of disrepair that they were looking to sort of offload some of their building stock, be able to lease those buildings out in order to kind of uh, uh, reduce their deferred maintenance overall on the campus and improve the quality of the workplace for their staff. And so we took a pretty deep dive into their workplace needs. One of the things that became apparent very early on was that there was kind of no standardization of their workplace. Folks might have a 450 square foot office, and another person might have a 50 square foot office, and it didn't matter what they needed or how they worked. That was just the space that they found and the space that they used. So one of the things that came out of that was sort of a standardized procedure of being able to allocate who gets an office, who works in an open workspace, and to moderate and standardize those spaces. We did a test fit to see if we could fit the National Parks of Boston staff in the Hoosac stores as part of the report, and it did work out. But what also became apparent as we concluded our report and as Sasaki concluded their report was that the Hoosac stores was much better suited to be that front door to the Navy Yard, and that we could move the USS Constitution Museum. We could move the existing visitor center, National Parks Visitor Center, which is currently being housed in Building 5 here, to the Hoosac stores and really provide sort of that front door, that gateway that everyone wanted this park to have. And so we spent a substantial amount of time looking at the Hoosac stores as sort of this potential reuse project to turn this into a new home for the USS Constitution Museum and the National Parks of Boston Visitor Center. The Hoosac stores is actually two buildings technically. It was Hoosac stores 1 and 2. Looking at it from the outside, it's just a trapezoidal building, but there was a firewall down the middle, which I guess technically makes it two buildings. There was also Hoosac Stores 3 that was demolished in 2000, I believe, just because it was in such bad shape. Um, the site of the building was actually quite a bit larger than the building itself. So you can see here from our survey is that the building is this trapezoidal shape here, but then there was a parking lot next to it, as well as a small brick building that stood out in the parking lot. And then there was still evidence of the railroad tracks that used to serve the building when it was constructed in 1899. Very faded floor plan, but if you can kind of squint, you can see it. Very tight column grid, obviously, because it was a warehouse. Some of the floors were rated for about 500 pounds per square foot. So you can imagine that those were very densely packed floor plate. And the floor to floor heights were pretty modest. 10 foot 8. They averaged about 10 foot 8. And then when you had the larger beams in those spaces, a finished ceiling height in most of the spaces would probably average out to be about 8.5 to 9 feet. Um, so where I'm going with this is that the building had a lot of challenges. If we wanted to make it a museum, we would want to open up spaces. We would want to create double height spaces. Would want to carve away spaces, carve out facade elements for windows, and so on and so forth. You can see in some of these images, starting from the left and going to the right, the size of some of these members here. This is a really interesting detail, I thought, of the large beam being supported by the column here, and then the column above actually poking through the floor and being supported on that beam below. And then as you went up in the building, the columns got smaller, the beams got smaller until you were up at the roof here, where the columns were. I think they were 6 by 6 or 8 by 8, with much smaller beams supporting that. And so we were tasked with the proposal to reuse the building, and how we could reuse the building and create this world-class museum and visitor center. And so we studied a lot of options, and this was for maybe about a year and a half, 2 years of looking at ways to reuse the building. Looking at ways to maybe build on top of it, carve out the inside and insert a new construction on the inside, maybe only carving out a portion of it and building new in that half, or maybe even using the building itself as something else and building on the adjacent lot, so we could have more columnless space and a larger floor to floor. And ultimately, the decision was made that there were too many factors that made the Hoosac building great as a warehouse, but not great for anything else. That the decision was made to tear it down and build new. And so this is a schematic rendering of the new Gateway Center in place of the Hoosac stores. So you can see here the USS Constitution. If you're familiar with the site, you know that in order to get onto the ship, you pass through Navy security, and then you're routed onto the ship. And so this will now serve as the home for the museum, as well as being the gateway to the ship. And then the third floor is dedicated to the Park Service, where they'll have a permanent installation, rotating exhibits, a theater, and a cafe. This is what it looks like from the harbor side, looking up toward the monument in the background there. And so this is kind of that gateway moment where you can see through the building, out to the harbor, out to Greater Boston beyond. The idea is that you would take an elevator up to the third floor, or take the large feature stair, where you would have this kind of panoramic view of downtown Boston and the harbor, looking out, uh, learning about all of the various monuments that you can see, various historic, um, notable landmarks that you can see from this space, introducing timelines and to understand the overlay of the history of the space, um, and perhaps even a large projection 3D model of the city of Boston that could be overlaid with various information. So ultimately, okay, so we're not going to put the staff in the Hoosac stores. Where is all the staff going to go? And the decision was made based on the square footage needed and the amount of work that was needed through deferred maintenance anyway, was that the National Parks Boston headquarters would repurpose Building 107, which was originally constructed to be a public works building anyway. Currently, it houses some collections, a few park staff, facilities and maintenance occupies the entire first floor, and then general storage on the third floor. And so if we can't reuse the building itself, obviously the next question we asked was, well, can we use its parts? Can we make this a deconstruction project instead of a demolition project? And surprisingly, Parks was on board with that. They were really kind of stewards in, I should say, Parks is not in the business of knocking buildings down. Let's say it's not what they do. They work very hard to preserve the nation's history. And so when we introduced this idea of reusing the parts of the building, they were shockingly on board with it. And so the first thing we needed to do was figure out how much of the building we wanted to save. And so there was a balancing act there of how much we need versus how much we can store and where we're going to store it. And fortunately, we were able to work with a great project manager on Parks' staff that was able to find us space on the Navy Yard that we could lay down this material once we pulled it out of the building. And so we did a takeoff. We had every member of the structure documented, so it was a fairly easy process to kind of disassemble it in Revit and understand the quantities that we had and what we were able to work with there. And then when the contract went out for this project, it was the CMA on the project was Procon. And the contractor that was hired was the contractor on the right here, Credair. I'm going to mess up the name. We know them as CEV. And they actually, under their umbrella, had subs that had done this kind of work before. And we're really excited to take apart this historic building. And it was quite amazing to watch this come down. We had a time-lapse camera set up so we could watch the deconstruction process. And once they started going, aside from a couple little hiccups here and there, it came down relatively quickly. They were able to, like I said, store most of the material on site. And then surprisingly to us, which was a really exciting find, is that other parks in the region got word that this was happening, and the timbers that we were pulling out of this building were incredible. They were entire trees, and some of the beautiful old growth timber that you'll find. And so some of these other parks got wind of this and reached out to the Charlestown Navy Yard. And so we ended up or they ended up sending out timbers to all these different organizations. Some of the timbers will even be reused as they continuously rebuild the USS Constitution. And then for us, what we were going to use the buildings for, the timbers for was in Building 107. So keeping it local, we're going to be using the timbers as flooring, stairs, and millwork in in the National Parks of Boston project. And then also we're looking to use the aggregate in the bricks, or sorry, use the bricks as aggregate in the facade panels of the new Gateway Center, and also as a feature wall in Building 107, but primarily reusing those as aggregate. And so this is some of those timbers as they were being carted off-site. Again, you look at the rings on the ends of these timbers, and you can see, how old these trees were when they came down. And like I said, working with this particular crew, they were just as excited about this as we were. They took some of the guys were taking little offcuts and creating little side tables out of them. Some of the bricks were stamped in a way that they were able to trace back from where they actually originally came from, which was really pretty neat. So yeah, like I said, the timbers are going to be used in the renovation of Building 107. You can see here when it was first constructed. I believe they finished construction originally around 1907. And again, it was a public works project. You can see the draftsman in this picture down here. So, in some ways, it's kind of going back to its roots. It's becoming this hub for the National Parks of Boston once again. And not only are we reusing the wood and the brick, but because we're replacing the entire roof, we're going to have a lot of slate that we're going to be reusing as backsplashes and flooring in the project. And some of those cages that you saw, this is up on the third floor of the building. It's a very long building. It's about 300 feet long and about 60 feet wide, with a skylight that runs the entire length of it. So you get really great light up on the third floor. But they were using it as kind of general storage. So we thought, the crates could be, or the wire mesh could be used, and we're going to be using that in various ways in the new project as well. And so we presented all of the materials to the parks about the end of last year. And right now we're about a signature away from getting the solicitation out for contractors to work on this project. And I know one of the contractors is going to be CEV, because they've had such a good experience working with the park and working with the Hoosac Deconstruction. And so getting to see the life of a project or a life of a building that didn't end up working out to the way that we wanted it to initially, serving a second life in a new project is pretty exciting. And so we're really excited that this worked out, and really happy with everyone that was involved. And yeah, I'd really like to hear it if you have any questions, because I'd like to hopefully be able to answer them.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jason. I said earlier, if anyone has any questions, you can either feel free to put them in the chat or look to raise your hand. As per usual, I always have questions. So to start out, being a contractor, there's often I think, hesitation by designers to say, well, we want to be more circular, we want to move towards deconstruction, reuse, but it's just not going to work out in the cost for implementation. So knowing that deconstruction material reuse for the Hoosac building wasn't kind of the original plan, it kind of developed as the process went on. Did you find that there were any kind of adverse effects to the budget or cost escalations from the eventual kind of original plan to this much more circular plan?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because I think, one, it has to do with the client, obviously. And as I said before, like, National Parks is not in the business of tearing down buildings. But in this instance, they were faced with this building that was just sitting there. They had stuff stored in it, but it was just because they had that space to store it in. It's not like it was being stored in a precious way. But so, if you have this asset that is no longer functional, what's the next best thing you could do? And so when we suggested the idea of reusing the parts of it, they were definitely on board. And so, of course, naturally, the next question came, okay, so this is how much more is this going to cost us as opposed to just hitting it with a wrecking ball? And so we went out, and the engineer that we were working with at the time, who's also a cost estimator, gave us an estimate, and it was ridiculously high. It was, like project stoppingly high. And we're like, okay, this isn't going to work. So we need a second opinion. So we got a second opinion from a local cost estimator, and his estimate was tremendously lower than the first estimate. And we're like, okay, something's not right. We've got to figure out like where things are being miscommunicated, or what the delta is here. And we were able to reconcile them to a point, but there was still a very large gap between the two. And at that point, the GSA, you know, props to them, said, you know what? Let's just put it out on the street, and see where the numbers come in. And we ended up getting about 6 to 12 proposals, and about half of them were in more of the lower end range. And so we were able to, confidently, obviously, then move forward with it. But it was that sort of leap of faith that the GSA was able to take to say, like, all right, enough with the spreadsheets and the people that are working behind the desk. Let's actually go out there on the street and get numbers from people that are doing this, and see if we can make it happen. So it did take a little bit of a leap of faith from the government side, which is not usually how the government works. But in this instance, it worked out, and really saved the project.
Before we move on to other questions, kind of on that point with costs, Megan in the chat asked about timing impacts. Were those kind of obviously oftentimes combined, but did you find that the deconstruction of the building took inherently more time than a traditional demo would?
It probably did. It probably did take more time, which is obviously will take more money. But ironically, the thing that took the longest was because the building ran adjacent to the Freedom Trail, like literally kind of abutted the Freedom Trail. We had a transportation plan that sort of detoured cars and turned Constitution Road into a one-way street. And when we presented that to DOT, they were like, nope, that's not going to work. You got to do scaffolding over the Freedom Trail and keep that open 100% of the time. And there was a lot of pushback from parks about not wanting that risk of people walking by an active demolition site. And so that back and forth ended up taking much more time than we had anticipated. Eventually, DOT won out, and we built the scaffolding and kept the Freedom Trail open. But the demolition itself, like once it started up, aside from some of the days when it was so cold and windy the guys couldn't be on site, it went pretty smoothly.
It's probably better it was a deconstruction rather than demolition if people had to go by too. So
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Becky, I see you have your hand raised.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Jason. That was a fantastic presentation. I mean, Boston is full of bricks. I was wondering how can you speak a little bit more about how you reused yours? I saw that you had that you were using them as aggregate in the
Yep.
facade rather than just full original bricks.
Yeah,
Can you-
so the Gateway Center is still in design. It's between schematic design and design development now. So right now they just have a few uh, uh, bins of bricks that they're storing on site. And one of the things, the nice things about making them aggregate is that we weren't asking the contractor to kind of like take out whole bricks, clean them up, and then reuse those bricks in kind of a more precious way. We just wanted the material that will eventually be ground up and used as aggregate in these precast panels. So yeah, right now they're just being stored on the Navy Yard in the quantity that we hope is enough based on our calculations. And when the Hoosac stores, or sorry, when the Gateway Center project is ready to go ahead, then that'll be part of our specifications.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Brett, I see you have some questions in the chat. If you want to come off, I can ask the questions for you, but if you want to come off mute, by all means, ask them.
Sure. Thanks, Michael. Thank you very much, Jason. A wonderful project. And I know there's maybe some good markets for bricks. You have high disposal costs there. You have unions, so there's a lot of parameters around things that affect the cost. Could you just talk about what kind of contracts were done, how it kind of worked out around perhaps goals for the reuse recovery, where of course you could always just say recycle X, Y, and Z, and it would be in any form other than landfill. Did they internalize maybe some disposal savings, or did they break that out so you could kind of see based on achievement, what is more of a line by line payment that if you salvage more, then there's a deduct for disposal, or they just kind of, did that all on their own, spreadsheet. And then based on what they were able to recover, I'm assuming you might have, in a virtual world, you could have modeled the whole building and said, here's 10 million brick, but
Mhm.
that recovery would never be the 10 million bricks. So how did you kind of hold them to some goals or targets when you thought about the redesign and that
Mhm.
you needed at least whatever number of bricks?
Yeah. Yeah, well, those are good questions. I'll try to answer them all because there were a few in there. I think so in terms of quantities, the wood was very easy to quantify. So we knew how much wood we needed to save based on the amount of material that we were going to use in Building 107, and then again, like all of the other ancillary, organizations that wanted timber as well. They literally had a whiteboard in their office trailer that had each member how many they've claimed, how many they need to claim, and like a checkbox at the end of it to say like, okay, we've gotten this many recovered, and we're able to kind of tally it that way. And then with the brick, it was more about uh, uh, cubic volume of brick that we were saving. So before we started the process, we spoke with one of our precasters that we've worked with in the past, Concrete Works out of New Jersey, and we're able to talk with them to understand how much aggregate we would need per panel in order to kind of get the quality of uh, the visual quality that we were looking for. And so, using that math, we were able to kind of understand, approximately how much of a volume of brick we would need in order to, uh, uh, do the facade the way that we wanted to do it. The brick ended up being, again, because it was, we weren't being precious about it. We didn't need it cleaned. We just needed the material. That became a little bit easier to collect than if we needed to be a little bit more precious about it. But ultimately, like it was kind of like a self-fueling machine. We knew what we needed. Parks knew what they needed for their purposes, and anything that was left over was then shipped out to be recycled. But that ended up being a pretty small quantity of the overall uh, structure of the building.
And so was the disposal, which it sounds like was pretty minimal, that was just internalized into the pricing based on you saying, if you meet this target, we could expect obviously disposal to be very much less.
Hmm.
Did you see that kind of calculation, or they just sort of say, well, you told us what you want, we'll just give you a bid, and to your knowledge, they just figured out what they figured out?
Yeah, I didn't see that personally, but all of the kind of bids that were reviewed by the GSA run through sort of that uh, evaluation process, I should say. Like they were evaluated based on their fee and based upon their project approach. And the GSA has their metrics. The GSA basically served as the owner's rep in this scenario to the parks, who was the client. And so they have a very structured way of reviewing these contracts and understanding like where value lies and if you're saving X, you're going to be disposing less of Y, for instance. So it's not something that I was uh, privy to, but I know that was part of the contractor's evaluation.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Uh, Camille, you had a couple questions. I don't know if you want to come off mute or I can ask them for you.
Sure. Yeah. I had two actually. I was wondering because um, I was wondering if you had carried out at first a material audit to identify all the material types, quantities, qualities. I know that you had already the historical plan, so you could do a Revit model.
Mhm.
So that was probably helpful, but I'm just wondering about the material auditing. And then my second question was about speccing reused materials. So once it's deconstructed, now for the new construction, how do you spec reused materials knowing that there are no real standards for reused materials? Yeah, these are my two questions. Thank you.
Yeah. So the first one, so ironically, because we had done so much work on feasibility studies, we had stacks of reports on the materials themselves. We had done borings, we had done samplings of all of the woods, all the steel, all the iron that was in the project. So we had, I don't know if it would technically be a material audit, but we had a pretty good understanding of the quality of the materials. For instance, this was a masonry bearing building, the exterior load bearing building, and so as you went down, the brick walls got thicker and thicker. So by the time that you were down at ground level, they were about 6 wides thick. And you look at the building and you're like, wow, that brick is in terrible shape. But as soon as you take one of the wides off, you have brick in there that is essentially been untouched since 1899. And so, the brick on the inside ended up being the stuff that we wanted to harvest more because it was in better shape than the stuff that had been, exposed to Boston weather and salt and ice and what have you for over 100 years. Um, so it was good. It was a little bit serendipitous that, we had all of this knowledge when we started proposing this because we were trying to initially save the building. And then the second question was about, sorry, refresh my memory.
Specking
Oh,
reused
specking.
materials. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I'm not a spec writer, but we work with a very good spec writer in here in New York, and there are ways to write your specs that get you what you're looking for. A lot of the times, it's written in a way that uh, leans more on performance based, having to meet certain metrics. And a lot of the time, it's also, the visual mock-ups and the things that you have to do from an aesthetic point of view in order to get to make sure that you're getting what you want. I will say because all of this material is uh, so the quality of it just outright is so high. It gives you a very good starting point for when you're uh, suggesting reuse because the wood's going to be good, the brick's going to be good. So it kind of takes a lot of uncertainty out of it in the outset that you might otherwise need to have to quantify in specifications.
I see. Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
There was Brad kind of initially talked about this, but for the deconstruction itself, Boston's a very strong union market. Were there any union concerns? Because right now there's a lot of demolition subs in this market that are looking to slowly kind of transition towards more selective demolition and towards deconstruction. But it seemed that the crew that was out here really understood really what needed to go and did a very kind of piecemeal job, floor by floor, deconstructing it. Were there any contracting concerns? Really, if you know about that, I know you're on the design side. Really, what did that look like?
No, it's a really good question, and I don't know because there were so many like under the CEV umbrella, they had a couple of subs that were specific to specific things. So there was a specific contractor that dealt with the wood. There was a specific contractor that dealt with the brick, and I'm not sure how that all was contracted in terms of responsibilities and unions and so on. But they were very good at managing, the team so that there weren't any, inflatable rats outside of the building or anything of that nature. And yeah, we didn't run into any sort of any of those issues that I'm aware of.
We'll open up to the group. Like I said, if anyone wants to raise their hand for any final questions, still have a couple minutes left. The one question I do want to ask is, have you learned anything from this project that you would bring out to other projects as a designer? We have a lot of
Oh
designers on the
man.
call. Just curious.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's one of those things where uh it's really easy to think about just throwing something away. And when you're faced with the challenge of having to uh, re-envision a process that might be like so ingrained in you that you don't even question it. That's just an incredible learning experience. Everything that came out of this process, from the fact that like our office now is very conscious of any sort of adhesives that we specify or use in projects, because we know that at the end of life, you're not going to be able to use something that was glued together, you know, 50 years ago, 60 years ago. Like, can you design your new projects in ways that are more mechanically minded so that they can be disassembled and reused in the future? So it makes you rethink everything, not just from like the projects that might be deconstruction projects or projects that might face demolition, but it's like, okay, this new building, like how in 50 years, how will it be disassembled, or what parts of it can be somehow reused in the future? So it really, yeah, I mean, it's very similar to when we were having an internal conversation about mass timber. In mass timber construction, our office is doing our first mass timber project here in Brooklyn, and it's a completely different way of thinking about the overall life cycle of a building, and the benefits that come with mass timber are very similar to the benefits that come with circular design. And I think you start to see the design process in a different way when you're asked to look through it, uh, asked to look at it through these lenses. So yeah, I mean it's very exciting, and it's a very it's very eye-opening for sure.
I might have more questions.
Yeah.
Because
Promise.
we're working
Please.
on a similar project actually. It's like super similar
Mhm.
in New York City. But so I was wondering, so you had one demo contractor who did the full demo and they accepted to do that. And it was, would you say it was the same, like to what extent it was a cost premium compared to like if they had done demoing? Would you know the
Oh,
difference?
uh,
Or
I don't. All I know was that, well, like once we um like I said, it was like our estimator was, or the engineer's estimator was really high. Our estimator was really low. They were able to reconcile a little bit. And then the GSA said, okay, let's just put it out on the street. So we never got to the point, like we never kind of broached the idea of let's just knock it down. And so I couldn't tell you what the premium would have been. I know that like once we got parks committed to the idea that okay, the building has to come down. Let's do it in the most responsible way possible. They were just looking for the least expensive way to do that.
Mhm.
So knocking it down without reusing it was just off the table at that point. So that says a lot about your client too. And I don't
Yeah.
think any of us have uh, you know problems with our national parks. So
Mhm.
they're a good client to work for.
I see. And so were there any materials, I'm kind of hogging the mic here, but last question. Were there any materials that were reused off-site? And if so, were these materials sold or donated? How did you do that?
I don't think anything was sold. I think the timbers were definitely reused by various other parks in the region. So that was a big one, and then also the I don't think anyone else took the bricks either. Pretty sure. But the timbers were definitely in um, definitely in demand. I don't think in the end there was probably maybe 10% of the timbers that we didn't end up reusing in some way or another because they were in such high demand. So
I
yeah,
see.
and at that point it was pretty successful.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So it was kept by the same owner, just on different projects. That probably made
Uh,
it easier.
Yes, for the most part, because there was
Yeah.
actually at one point, in the we were going through the estimates and thinking about like how to make this feasible. It's like, okay, well, does the contractor, in some scenario, do we keep 50% and the contractor gets to keep 50% and then they get to sell it, and that's part of a reduction in cost of the project. But I think that added step would have just been more hassle than it would have been worth. Um, but yeah, it was all ended up being kept by parks in some way or another, or the Constitution, I should say. They did get some as well.
Thank you.
So they have their own forest that they go to also for this specific wood for the Constitution. So I don't know how much of that will actually be reused.
I see there's two more questions, but just to quickly add, and I think Brett kind of brought this up in the chat earlier, there is oftentimes cost savings in the fact that this was not disposed of traditionally.
Mhm.
So, I mean, it very kind of a blessing to have an owner that's going to say, hey, not only do we want to reuse as much as we can in the new space, but here's storage space, here's the lack of needing to send it off. And I think, especially given a building of that size, the lack of disposal costs really can supplement the project to a point where it could become cost effective to not demo it simply because as you're taking this down, you're just not getting rid of them. You're not seeing those dumpsters leave the site every single time in this region, about $850 a dumpster. So that really adds up over time.
Yeah,
Um,
ironically, it is because this park has so much open space that we were able to find space. They were able to carve out space for the stuff to remain, before we're actually able to, reuse it. So place like in New York, like where are you going to take this stuff?
Sure.
You're going to have to take it out to New Jersey or a lay down spot way out in Brooklyn or something like that. Like they were able to go, you know, 500 feet away and be able to store this. So that helped out.
Yeah. And just the last two questions as we're running out of time. Michelle Lambert of CLF National wanted to know if there's going to be a case study for this project put together, because there seems to be a lot of really good, juicy data. Not only we discussed cost, but you can turn a lot of this into embodied carbon savings.
Yeah, no, I would love to do that, and I'm actually it wasn't this project specifically, but we're hoping we submitted a proposal to speak at Greenbuild in October on this topic and other kind of sustainability topics. So that at a minimum, but yeah, we're definitely looking to do more with this, and I think it would be to everyone's advantage to be able to learn from this project because it was because in the end it did go very, very well. So it's not one of those oh my God, let me listen to all the horrors that plagued this project, being this new type of approach. So gotta say when that goes right, pat yourself on the back.
Mm. There you go. And then the last question I see, Cassie Merzer with the Mass DP wanted to know, with a lot of public sector clients, they have climate action plans, goals, really trying to claw back against the climate crisis. Do you see this project and other projects like it really pushing forward and growing in either number or sophistication?
I would hope so. Yeah. I mean, I think uh, having a successful case study is always the best way to convince future clients that this is a good idea. And so I think, anything that we can do to kind of, yeah, promote this and convince people that this is the way to do it. I think, for them, it's always going to be about cost and about space. If you have the space, we can work with you on the cost. Let's do what's right for our planet and keep this stuff out of the landfill and reuse it when we can.
Awesome. Well, Jason, thank you so much for presenting today. We appreciate it. If you can, we'd ask if you could please share the presentation materials so we could send it out to the group.
Yeah,
And thanks for highlighting an amazing project right in our backyard.
awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Uh, for the last minute or two, I'm going to put something in the chat. Olivia and I will keep the survey for the reuse roadmap version 2 up until, we'll say, the last day of March the 31st. So please take a look at that as well. Even if you're not interested and you want to share your ideas on content, on maybe someone else who might be able to support this effort, please do that, like I said, in the next coming days. Other than that, I don't think there's anything else. Olivia, do you want to share anything before we let people go?
No, that's it. Maybe you had an update on the Rerox visit timeline.
Oh, yes. Reached out to Resource Waste in Roxbury. We're hoping that the next meeting could be a field trip. I have not got final confirmation, but this was the RCF facility in Roxbury, had a pretty bad fire this past May of 2025, and they have just finalized or are in the process of finalizing new optical sorters, different eddy currents, and are hoping to open up fully actually in the next week or two. So we're hoping that either April or May are going to be a field trip to Resource Waste Roxbury. We did this a couple of years ago, and now since they've upgraded since the fire, we're hoping to bring everyone out who can make it as well. But we will keep everyone in the loop as details are finalized with that. Other than that, thank you everyone for coming today. We will look to send out the recording, presentation, any meeting minutes out to you all. And hopefully it gets warm because cold is winter. Oh my God, please go away. Thank you, everyone.